Good morning. Welcome to The Human Author. My name is Jen Cantwell, and today I'm going to be working on chapter 6 in my epic fantasy novel called The Warning. The series that it's part of is called Light Chaser. If you'd like to learn more about it, you can visit thehumanauthor.com and click on projects. I'll give you some info there. Reminder that the first 10 minutes of every session, I'm reading the work that I did the day before so that you can catch up and so that I can catch up too. But today, before I start, I wanted to introduce some artwork, and actually just this one image for today by David Planeta. Actually, I'm not sure about the pronunciation there, but this is one of the images that first really hooked me into his work and was really inspiring for me to create these giant animals that guarded pools of magical liquid called light. I'm showing you this one today because today the characters are going to see the tortoise, which is this guy. And the thing that's so cool about it, I don't know if you can see, but this little man standing here was a big part of my inspiration for this series. So I just wanted to share this image with you and also to send you to look at more of David's work. You can find him on Instagram. And if you for mini people in the jungle, you should come across his page. Also, if you Google him, he's got a bunch of other different, locations that you can see his work on, like ArtStation and things like that. So if you do Google, it's DAWIDPLANTA. I think I got it. Anyways, so I just wanted to share that with you this morning, give you a little something visual. But I'm going to go ahead and read what I did on Friday, which is important because I haven't read it since Friday either. So we'll see how it goes. All right. This is the beginning of chapter 6. I was still just as exhausted as I'd been the night before, the adrenaline having drained out of me. I looked down at Brennen, but he just stared right ahead blankly. Why did you follow us? I asked. You could have died just now. It was a stupid thing to do. He looked up at me and frowned. What else was I supposed to do? I can't stay with them. Why not? And what about Regan? Where is she? I don't know, he said. She followed Egan when they took him and your grandmother. She made me hide in the closet in your grandmother's flat, so when they came, they didn't see me. Right before they opened the door, Regan took me by the shoulders and made me promise to leave the city and look for you. She told me that you could protect me. He looked up at me, sad eyes. Was she right? I was forcefully reminded of my experience with Quinn, the way that he had been my charge, my job to guard him against all Torrin represented. Quinn had been younger than Brennen, but right now Brennen seemed to be the young one. He was only 12, not quite old enough to travel on his own, and yet Regan had sent him after us. If only she'd realized what a difficult errand she was sending him on. I'm glad I finally found you, he said. Even if you're mad. He looked up at Kenneth. Thanks, I guess. Kenneth glared down at him. I don't need a stowaway on this journey. You should go back to the others. It's not safe out here for kids. I laughed at this, then quieted myself when I remembered there were still 3 lawmen out in the forest. For kids? We're kids. He shrugged. Maybe, but it doesn't feel that way anymore, does it? He had me, but my loss of a childhood seemed to date back several years, not just a few months. In any case, you can't send him back, I said. What if he gets lost? He won't. You? He looked down at Brennen, but Brennen looked right through him. When they left me behind, it was all I could do to not be caught by the lawmen. We'd only been there for a couple of weeks before it happened, so not that many people knew about me. I think Egan understood. He released my hand, looking down and wringing his together. But Regan, I can't believe she was just trying to protect you, I said. But Kenneth might be right. If you come with us, it could turn into a huge mess, and we won't be able to either. I know, he said, staring at the ground, but if I'm going to die, I want it to be with my sister. I felt like I'd been hit in the chest. His words were so sad. When I thought about all the things, all the ways Torrin had managed to hurt the children who lived in our lands, it made my blood boil. Fine, I said, you can come. Now, just a minute, Kenneth said. He's going to slow us down. You know that. On the contrary, he's the one who kept us alive the last time we met. He can find food for us, and he can run fast. I looked Brennen in the eye. You realize you might not make it. He shrugged. I might not make it anyway, and the same goes for you. He's coming with us, I finally said. You can't do this, Kenneth said, clearly irritated. I won't allow it. You won't allow it? I scoffed. Just who do you think is in charge here? He raised his club, not to threaten me, but to show me his strength. In return, I conjured a little lightning in my right hand, then started playing with it, sending it back and forth to tree. Fine, he said. We can go together as a team. Will that do? I sighed. I'm not looking to outrank you, but I know this kid. He deserves better from us than just hiding him in the forest. His sister, she's special. She was sort of reborn from a pool of light after everyone was certain she'd been killed. She's so much different now, and I'd be surprised if she wasn't able to escape the dungeon on her own. Do you really think so? Brennen said, eyes wide. I looked down at him, and I couldn't help on my face. I don't know, but I do know you're not going to get anywhere without us. And neither are you, I said to Kenneth. Kenneth blew out an angry breath, then finally turned away from me and made his way deeper into the forest. When he didn't stop walking, I jogged to catch up with him. Where do you think you're going? I asked. What about us? He was making more noise than was wise, his footfalls only slightly muffled by the dirt, and he was walking fast. We need to go deeper in, he said. We should hide during the day, then walk at night. He looked behind him, and when he saw Brennen following us, he groaned. I still say this is a terrible idea. I chuckled. I couldn't help it. I was the type of person who always seemed to have plenty of terrible ideas. We'll be okay. Once we find his sister and my father, we'll have a much better chance at fighting for the city. I wasn't lying exactly, but it was the only thing I could think of to do first. We would liberate them, and hopefully it would result in a cascade of fighters to take out Zahn. This should be okay, Kenneth said, pointing to a small group of trees. It was obvious he was upset. Are you sure you want to come? I asked. You don't have to. He didn't answer me, just shook his head and sat down with his back up against a tree. We should rest here, I said to Brennen. We've been going all night. I peered through the trees, keeping an eye out for those other horsemen, the 3 who'd shown up with name. But the wood was empty. I sat down next to Kenneth, then took Brennen's hand and pulled him down next to me. Go to sleep now, I said. We'll leave when it gets dark again. Brennen laid down on the ground, but his eyes stayed wide open, looking at the canopy above. I couldn't force him to sleep, but I went ahead and laid down too. When I saw Kenneth still sitting stubbornly awake, I knew there was nothing I could do. You take first watch, I said, but you'll need to rest too, don't you think? He looked strung out, and it reminded me of me searching for the one thing I knew would set me right, but not. I'd made my decision. So, as I closed my eyes, I focused not on Zahn's pool, but on Zahn himself, and I found myself eager to find him, to put him down. Had I become a murderer, a monster? I still wondered if, when we found her, Regan would be able to see right through me, but that was a worry for a different day. I woke up to the sound of Brennen crying, and for a moment I got ready to fight. Then I realized he was still asleep, crying from whatever dream he was. I reached out my hand and brushed the hair out of his eyes, but he didn't wake. I sat up and saw Kenneth, who looked terrible. It's your turn, I said. You need rest too. He shook his head. I can't defend you if I'm asleep. I laughed. Do you really think I need to be defended? Have I not shown you the power I have? He shrugged. I guess. But when I saw you walk away that day, I I frowned. You were there when Zahn attacked me? Of course everyone was. And most everyone was sorry to see you go. Zahn must have realized this, and it wasn't long after that he began rounding people up. This was a revelation for me. Kenneth, my old friend, looking out for me. Has it been this whole time that people have been imprisoned? I asked. Did it start that day? It only took a few days for him to come up with whatever plan it is he has. Then it was only a matter of time for him to rally supporters. How many were there? I asked. I don't half. This took the wind right out of me, and I tried to imagine half the kingdom under lock and key. I couldn't help but wonder who was feeding them, if anyone. Come on, I said. You need sleep as much as anyone. I'll keep watch. He peered out from our little hiding spot, scanning the woods for a threat he hadn't yet seen. I don't think there's anything out there, I said, and I'm not helpless. Trust me, I'll wake you if anything happens. Finally, he relented and lay back in the dirt. Just an hour. Raised an eyebrow. Only an hour? Promise me, he said. I sighed, irritated myself, but then I nodded my head. You're the leader. And finally, he closed his eyes. That night and the few that followed, we made it a point to travel in the dark. It didn't take more than a day for us to make it to the end of the trees, and after that it was open grassland, followed by desert. I knew how to put up a shield, and I was ready to defend one if necessary, but we didn't see another soul on the journey. While searching for threats on the horizon, something that was easy to do when the moon was high, I saw something I didn't expect, something I'd forgotten about, the tortoise. My heart leapt at the sight of him in the distance, an enormous round shell blocking the view to the wildlands beyond. It was all I could do to keep myself from running to him. Kenneth seemed concerned. What is that thing? He asked. It's a keeper, I said. He'll have light for us. So now that I've read through that, I feel like maybe that was a double read through. I'm going to just check something else out. That was what I read yesterday or on Friday. Okay, let me find the window. So the reading will be a little extra today because I just read the same thing. And let me get to the right screen. There we go. All right, I'm going to keep going. But light is dangerous, he said. You know there's none in this kingdom. Dangerous? Since when? Since always, he said. It's been outlawed ever since you left, even before that. Who told you it was dangerous? He shrugged. My family. They told me for years to stay away from you and your father. I knew asking you for magic was against the law, but I've never gotten close to tasting light. Well, you're in for a treat. I looked down at Brennen. Did you get any the last time we were together from the horse? No, he said, only Regan, and your father refused to allow it. We didn't get any light the entire way home. His home. I stopped walking. It's your home now, too, I said. You know that. He walked a few steps ahead of me, then turned back. I don't have a home. The only home I have is Regan, and we've never been safe. I sighed, knowing enough about his past to understand that he was right. But had any of us been safe? Maybe not. But his short childhood had been nothing more than torturous. He won that argument. We're going to make it that way, I said. You can help us get into the city, but I'm going to want you to hide once we're inside the walls. He stood up tall, then turned and walked away. I won't be hiding anywhere. Maybe he was right. Maybe I should let him join us in the fight. But I still wasn't ready to allow to fight an evil wizard and his master. I followed after him. Well, you have to stick close by then, and it will be dangerous. I considered the fact that I would have to kill again. Had I become a monster? I didn't know yet, but as I thought back to my hands wrapped around Colm's neck, I thought the answer was there for me, just out of reach. We walked on for another hour before we spoke again, and when the silence was broken, it was Kenneth to do it. I'm not so sure about this idea, he said. I've never seen a keeper before. They've always told us how dangerous they are. Well, they're big, that's for sure, I said. And it's true that some of them can be dangerous. They're called fiends, and they hide out and look just like keepers. But the tortoise isn't one of them. He could have killed me long ago if he'd wanted to. It's the ram we have to watch out for. The ram? How many keepers are there? I put my hand on Brennen's shoulder as we walked, speaking to him as well. I'm not sure, I said, but I've seen plenty of them. Mostly they're helpful, and if they allow you to take the light, well, that's the best outcome from any meeting with a keeper. I kept walking, eager to make it to the tortoise, hoping in the back of my mind that he still had light in his pool. Okay, Kenneth said, if you're sure. I smiled in his direction. You know, it's okay for you to trust me. You and I, we have history. Isn't that enough? He paused for a moment, thinking. Then, I guess you're right, but you need to listen to me too. If we're going to do this together, we're going to need one another's trust. And what about me? Brennen asked. I can help. We can deal with that argument when we get there, Kenneth said sharply. I squeezed Brennen's shoulder, and he backed off, understanding my intention. Well, before we do, you'll get to meet the one who told me what was coming for me, I said. He's the one who told me about Torin, and even though I didn't want to believe him at first, proof of the prophecy he'd relayed has manifested ever since I left him. This Torin, Kenneth went on, I've not heard of him. Who is he? Is he working with Zahn? I sighed. I don't know, but I'd be surprised if not. But would I really be? I'd always considered the possibility that Zahn was working alone, and if it were true, then the danger would be much worse. I thought back to the visions I'd had in the forest, wondering if somehow they'd been real. Of any of them, grandmother had been the most important person. Maybe she had been a figment of my imagination, but somehow I didn't think so. Maybe she was a ghost. This thought stopped my breathing, and for a moment I felt despair. You always knew this would happen. You knew people would die. Maybe, but I hadn't counted on it being my own family. I wondered if they'd been targeted because of Torin. If so, it only upped the ante for me to track him down. I wondered what would happen to me when I finally did. Would it be as easy as it had been to walk away from Zahn? He had seemed to give me everything he had, eager to kill me. But maybe that was the hint I needed now, for if that were true, Torin couldn't possibly be behind it. I thought about the book at the bottom of my bag, only my name remaining on its pages. I wondered why he hadn't killed me yet. It had been months, and yet I'd only ever seen his servants or my own hallucinations of him. No, I knew he wanted to do the deed himself. I sped up, eager now to make it to the tortoise. He had more counsel for me. Kenneth lagged behind, clearly nervous about moving forward toward such a beast. We're not going to get there fast enough if you insist on crawling, I called back to him. This time he was the one jogging to keep up with me. It's not the tortoise I'm worried about right now, he said. Look. He pointed in a different direction, back toward Eagleview. And then I saw it, 3 men on horses riding in our direction. Drop, I said, and all 3 of us hid down, protected by the 3-foot grass that surrounded us. After a few minutes, we could hear the hoofbeats. Then, when they got closer, their voices, they slowed their horses to a walk. We need to be more careful, one of them said. She could be anywhere. Now search. I don't understand the problem, came another voice. We know where they are. Better for us to make haste than lose her. I don't know that we do know where she is. The girl moves fast, and she's tricky. I've met her before, back on, and she has always been slippery. Keep your eyes open. Apparently, the leader of the group settled on trotting away versus galloping, but I felt an enormous measure of relief when I heard them passing us by. I looked over at Kenneth once there was silence again. That was close, I said. How long should we stay down? That depends. How far to the tortoise? Brennen squeezed my hand. I don't want to go. Why? I asked. You know the keepers are good, at least most of them. I've never been to the tortoise. How do you know? It was then that I realized I didn't know. How could I be 100% certain that he had my best interests at heart? Intuition. It's true that the tortoise didn't have good news for me the last time I saw him, I said, but what he told me might be the ticket to saving us all. I didn't want to believe him, and it took me months before I did. But Torrens trackers came after me, and that was all it took. You remember that, don't you? But what if the tortoise is the one to send them after us? Kenneth looked over at us, groaning. Between the two of you, I won't be surprised if we get caught well before we get to the gates of Eagleview. Be quiet, and let's get moving. The moon is about to set, and the darkness will be complete. That was a close call with the lawmen. We would be stupid to get into that situation again. The sooner we make it to the tortoise, the better, at least according to her. He nodded his head in my direction. A queen? Since when had he decided against trusting me? I was just about to ask him this question when he stood up and began walking briskly away. I scrambled after him, and Brennen right behind me. What's the rush? I asked. 5 minutes ago, you wanted to change our journey, to not see him at all. What has changed? He turned and crossed his arms. It's just that you're right. You have magic, and I don't. You worried about me not trusting you. Well, I guess time will tell. The night dragged on, and we were hungry once more. Without the light of the moon to guide us, all we could do was put one foot in front of the other and have the courage to keep moving. I looked down at Brennen, and he seemed resolved now. I wasn't sure if it was my words or Kenneth that had gotten through to him, but I was pleased that he was following without argument. As the sun began to lighten the sky on the horizon, we slowed. He's just there, I said, pointing. I can see him. It was all I could do to not break into a run. We were so close, but even I knew that we were close enough to risk walking. We're close enough to risk walking in the light of day. No, Kenneth said with superiority. It will have to be tonight. He nodded to Brennen. He needs to sleep, and we all need to eat. Brennen produced a handful of salad greens he'd found as the night had worn on. Then he sat down in the grass and made 3 little piles. I followed suit and picked up the one intended for me. I stuffed the first bite in my mouth, but it was difficult not to spit it out. We may as well have been eating nothing but the grass we were walking through. I looked at him and smiled, pretending that it was delicious, but he knew it was a lie. It will keep us alive, he said. Regan and I never had enough to eat from the lifters. She would hunt and I would gather. It kept us alive then, and it'll do the same now. Can you get us water? I was happy to have a task to do other than eat. I made a small basin out of the earth and put my hands on top of it, calling water, drawing it from the dirt. There you go, I said. I was sure not to take the first step myself, but to save it for these two, my companions, my friends. Brennen bent over the basin eagerly, then put his mouth right to the surface of the water and drank deeply. Kenneth looked on, waiting for his turn. When I'd first done this for him, he'd been untrusting. In fact, this whole time he'd seemed to carry that mistrust with him with every step he took. Is it me? I said as Brennen came up for air. Kenneth, is it me you don't trust? He shook his head, but didn't answer. Instead, bent over the pool and drank his fill. When he sat up again, he addressed my question. It's been a long time since I could trust anyone, he said. Surely you understand that. Maybe I did. Does that mean I shouldn't trust you? His face fell with this question, and then hardened. You can trust me, whether you actually do or not. It's important you know that. The day you left, I drew my father away, not willing to allow him to claim the prize for having found you. I think it all began that day, the way I extricate myself from my family. I'd taken a hit for what I'd done, and I had a black eye for a week. You can trust me. I didn't know what to say to this. I'd had my own fights with family, my father having taken a swipe at me more than once as I'd come up. I wondered what it would take for Kenneth to forgive his family. I'd forgiven mine, but my father had shown himself to have changed, and for the rest of our journey, he didn't touch me again. I do, I said, even though I had just come to this realization, this determination. Finally, he lay in the grass with us, seemingly able to come to the conclusion that he needed rest too. I need to sleep, he said. Will you keep watch? Of course I will, I said. You too, kiddo, I elbowed Brennen, and when he looked up at me, his eyes asking me to allow him to help, I shook my head. If anyone needs rest, it's you. You've been gathering all night, and we have all day to get ready for the next part of our journey. He wanted to argue, that much was clear, but he didn't. Somewhere inside, he reckoned I was in charge of him. Maybe it had even brought him comfort. Get me up when you get him up, he said. Promise. I smirked down at him, shoving him my pack for him to keep under his head as a pillow. I didn't promise. I didn't say another word. Instead, I kept low, just peeking over the tops of the blades of grass that blew in the wind. In the distance, I saw the lawmen riding away toward where the others were hiding. I hoped they had people on the lookout. We were too far to help them now. Maybe Kenneth had trained them to be cautious. Whether or not they were, I certainly was. And while I longed for nothing more than to run through the morning until we got to the tortoise, I settled in for what would be the next several hours as I kept watch. Okay, so that was a little mistake on my part. We got a little extra reading in. I'm going to go ahead and get started. As I intended, but I can keep going. We slept in the grass. Undo. They slept in the grass for several hours, but I found I wasn't tired. People. Period. Kenneth had made me promise to get him up, but he was snoring so loudly, I decided to let him sleep, period. It was Brennen who awoke first, period. New line. Open quote. What happened? Question mark, close quote, he asked, up and rubbing his eyes, period. Open quote. I thought you were going to get us up, period, close quote. New line. The sun was high overhead, and I pointed up at the sky, period. Open quote. We're not short on time, close quote, I said. Open quote. Period. Open quote. I know I told him but we have all day, period, close quote, new line, open quote. Have you seen any other lawmen? Question mark, close quote. He asked nervously, period. New line, open quote. No, close quote, I said, shaking my head, period. Open quote. The ones that passed us by haven't returned. Period, close quote. I wondered if they'd been killed, period. I doubted that Kenneth's people in the woods would have been able to defend themselves very well, period, comma, much less be able to take them down, period. Lawmen were hunters, comma, and they were good at it, period. New line. Brennen crawled over to where Kenneth was lying, period, comma, grabbing his arm and shaking it, period. New line, open quote. What are you doing? Question mark, close quote, I asked, period. Open quote. He needs sleep, comma, and anyway, he'll just be mad that I let him sleep for so long, period, close quote. New line. But Brennen seemed determined, period. A moment later, comma, Kenneth opened his eyes, period. Immediately, comma, he sat up, comma, an angry look on his face, period. New line, open quote. Bree, comma, I told you, M dash. Close quote. Close quote. Open quote. I told you you'd be safe, comma, and you trusted me, period. Close quote. New line. Open quote. You promised, period. Close quote. New line. This was true, comma, but I didn't care, period. Open quote. The last I need is to have somebody weak following me, period. Close quote. I pointed to the small pile of salad greens that Kenneth had yet to touch, period. Open quote. You should eat, period, close quote, new line, open quote. And you should sleep, comma, quote, he said, comma. Studying the greens, period. He brought them to his nose and sniffed, period. New line, open quote. Eat it, comma, close quote, I said, period. Open quote. It's good, period, close quote. New line. At this, comma, Brennen laughed, period. Open quote. No, comma, it's not, period. But it'll keep us alive, period, close quote, new line. Kenneth went ahead and took a bite, comma, then grimaced, period, open quote. It's so bitter, period, close quote, new line. Brennen shrugged, period. Open quote. It's all we have, period. And there's plenty, period, close quote. This isn't like last time, period, close quote. He looked at me, period. Open quote. There wasn't much for me to take last time, comma. But on this route, there's plenty, period. Close quote, new line. Open quote. Your turn, comma, close quote, Kenneth said, comma, looking at me, period. Open quote. But no promises, semicolon. You broke yours, comma, so I'm not offering, period, close quote, new line. I sighed, comma, laying down in the grass, period. I didn't answer him, comma. Just looked up at the sun, comma, shielding my eyes, period. New line. We have hours, period. Just sleep, period. But I couldn't sleep, period. I lay there for at least 30 minutes, comma, watching little bugs crawl up blades of grass, period. But sleep didn't come, comma, even when I closed my eyes, period. I knew that just laying there would allow my body to rest, comma. But instead of resting, I found my mind full of terrible things, period. This time, comma, I wasn't dreaming about anything, semicolon. I was imagining what would happen if we were to fail, period. If I were to fail, period. New line. No, period. You won't fail, period. You can't, period. New line. It was true, period. So, undo. It seemed like years since I'd first met a cap keeper, comma, the tortoise, period. He had served as the beacon for the wild cap lands, period. Beacon. And even though he'd had nothing but bad news for me, comma, there was part of me that longed to see him, period. New line. After a couple hours of tossing and turning, comma, my skin itching from brushing up against the grass, comma, I sat up, period. New line, open quote. Did you sleep at all? Question mark, close quote, Kenneth asked, period. New line. I shook my head, period, open quote. Not really, period. But I rested, semicolon. That will have to be enough, period, close quote. New line. The sun was starting to sink down in the sky, comma, and Kenneth peeked over the blades of grass, comma, searching for our pursuers, period. New line, open quote. I haven't seen them, comma, close quote, he said, period, open quote. Maybe they went a different direction, period, close quote, new line. Maybe they know where we're headed, period, new line. I wondered about Zahn, comma, about what he knew, period. The only thing I knew about Zahn was that he hated me, comma, and that he had hated my mother before me, period. My mother had had strong magic, comma, but apparently not as strong as my own, period. I supposed that one couldn't tell how much power she might have through a family bloodline, period. I wondered how many of the children in the garbage patch had their own magic, period. New line. It probably wasn't too many, period. Otherwise, comma, wouldn't they find something better to eat than garbage? Question mark. New line. I thought of the children back in the Cap Forest, period. Iona had been the leader of that group, comma, but then all of them had disappeared right from under our nose, period. Only Iona had returned, comma, and the news she'd brought had been terrifying, period. New line. If only Torin would stop setting his sights on children, comma, we might have a fighting chance, period. Briefly, comma, I wondered if that was how he saw me, comma, too, period. Was I still seen as a child, question mark. Did that make my danger more, question mark, close quote. New line. I looked around at my friends, comma, suddenly worried for them, comma, for even though they understood they were in danger, comma, I thought that maybe they didn't realize how much, period. I would be able to protect them, comma, but even my powers had limitations, period. I could set a protective shield that covered all three of us, comma, and I supposed that was the last spell. I would have to focus on, period. New line. Finally, comma, as the moon began to rise, comma, and the first of the stars came out, comma, we stood and began walking away from the little camp we'd made, period. Kenneth and I took turns watching the land behind us in case we were being followed, period. I led first, comma, scanning the land ahead, period. Ahead, undo, period. New line. We were getting closer and closer to the tortoise cap keeper, period. I wondered if he had any light left at all, period. Or any counsel, period. New line. Finally, undo. After a couple of hours, I was certain we were only moments, undo, minutes away from finally reaching him, period. Could he sense us coming? Question mark. Surely, comma, he could, period. New line. As we approached, comma, I called out to him, period, open quote. Great tortoise, exclamation point, close quote, undo. Are you there? Question mark, close quote, new line. There was no answer, period. Undo. There was no answer, comma. But I did get shushed angrily by Kenneth, period, new line, open quote. I don't care how close we are to that thing, comma, close quote. He said, period. You yelling out, quote, into the night is not wise, period. Close quote, new line. But I couldn't help it, period. I was desperate for help, comma. And even though I'd promised myself I would stay away from light, comma, we were all starving, comma, and I knew that even a sip of the stuff could save us, period. New line. I stopped yelling, comma, and started running, period. New line. Kenneth could hardly argue with this, comma, and though I was far ahead of them, comma, they followed, period. New line. Finally, comma, I made it to the great tortoise's head, period. If I'd been tall enough, comma, I might have him, period. But no one was as tall as a cap keeper, semicolon, not even the giants, period. Quote. Keeper, exclamation point, close quote. I said, period, open quote. What news do you have for Bree of Eagleview? Question mark, close quote, new line. It was then that I noticed, comma, even in the darkness, comma, that he wasn't moving, period. This was unusual, comma. For though he'd been close to death the last time I'd seen him, comma, he'd still had a small bit of light in his pool, period. Now, comma, the pool was empty, comma, and he was silent, period. New line. Confused, comma, I cautiously approached, comma, walking slowly now, period. New line. But when I got close enough to look him in the eye, comma, I realized the truth, period. All around us were gigantic boulders, comma, the stone that remained of a cap keeper when all of their light had been thieved, period. Taken, period. I remembered how boulders had fallen from his shell, the last time we'd met, period. He'd been close to death then, comma, and we hadn't taken his light, period. Check, period. New line, open quote. Oh, comma, tortoise, comma, close quote. I said, comma, tears coming eyes, period. New line. Who would counsel me now? Question mark. New line. Kenneth and Brennen finally caught up, comma, and they both stood beside me, panting, period. Comma. Open quote. So this is him? Question mark, close quote. Kenneth asked, period. Open quote. I thought they were supposed to talk to you, period, close quote. New line. I turned to him, comma, my tears falling to my cheeks, comma, streaking through the lines of dirt that crusted my face, period. New line, open quote. He was supposed to talk to me, comma, close quote, I said, period. Open quote. I'd been counting on it, period. Close quote. New line, open quote. What did he tell you last time? Question mark. Close quote. New line. Open quote. That I'd be the one. Torin. Period. Close quote. I began walking around the tortoise, comma, one hand following the stones, comma, wishing that I had enough power to bring him back to life, period. But the cap keepers were life, comma, the ones responsible for the most powerful magic in our lands, period. Now what? Question mark. New line. Open quote. And you believed him? Question mark. Close quote. Kenneth asked. Period. New line. Brennen shook his arm. Period. Open quote. What she's saying is the truth, comma, close quote, he said, period. Open quote. I met the others, period. They all said the same thing. Semicolon. Undo. Comma. That Bree would be the one, period, close quote. New line. Open quote. I never had a choice, comma, close quote, I said, period. Open quote. When I was told by him that Torin was after me, comma, I didn't believe him at first, period. But then, comma, they started chasing me, period, close quote, new line, open quote. They, question mark, close quote, new line, open quote. Well, comma, it seemed like everyone, period. We had the cap trackers, comma, first, period. Then, comma, in the cap shadow cap mountains, comma, we came across Torin's own son, period. I still don't understand why they didn't kill me when they had the chance, period. Close quote, new line, open quote. Maybe they can't kill you, comma, close quote, Brennen said, hopefully, period. Open quote. Maybe that's why he's after you, period. Close quote. New line. I hadn't thought of this before, period. Undo, comma. But maybe he was right, period. If so, comma. It meant that my power was far greater than even I had imagined, period. New line. A forced duel with the most evil wizard anyone had ever known, period. If the others couldn't do the job, comma, could he, question mark. New line. I placed my forehead against the tortoise's shell, comma. Wishing for him to come back to us, period. New line. But even my healing power wouldn't have been enough to bring him back, period. I turned to the others, period. New line, open quote. We'll have to find another cap keeper, comma, close quote, I said, period. And this time, comma, I didn't have light on my mind, period. New line, open quote. I thought we were headed home, comma, close quote, Kenneth said. New line, open quote. We were, comma, but the only beings that can tell me where I stand in the fight against Torin are the cap keepers, period, close quote, new line, or the cap fiends, period, new line. I knew that it would take days for us to make it to the ram cap keeper, comma. And he hadn't been very helpful at all, period. At least, comma, not to me, period. He'd both injured and saved my father's life. Father, period. He'd insisted that we commit to fighting the war against Torin, period. I hadn't forgotten the pain my father had endured, comma. And even though I knew the ram had a large pool of light, comma, I had no desire to see him again, period. New line. Suddenly, comma, I had an idea, period. It was madness, comma, I knew, comma. But maybe if we were able to find a cap fiend, comma, we would get the information we needed, comma, and probably all of the light we could handle, period. All right, that's it for today. Got 1,700 words out, so there'll be something to read tomorrow. Sorry about that. It was a little bit longer than I expected before. But I'm happy with the direction this is headed in. And that's pretty much all I got. Thank you for joining. And I will see you in the morning at 9.